Dawsonville. And Kevin Tanner, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate you choosing, Rick, this location here in Dawson County to have your first meeting. We're excited, and I know when Rick started talking about this and the speaker started talking about this during session, those of us here in North Georgia are excited about school safety and what the state may be able to do to help us. We also were glad to be able to get, about $8 million in this year's budget for school safety grants, which is going to amount to about $47,000, I believe, Dr. Gibbs, for Dawson County. So we're excited about what the state's already done, but we know that as a parent who has 3 daughters still in public school here in Dawson County, my number one concern is school safety. My number one concern is making sure my daughters are safe every day. And I'm thankful to live in a place where we've got a great school system, a great sheriff's office, a great sheriff, and good school resource officers that are working hard to keep them safe. But if there's anything we can do for you while you're here in Dawson County, let us know. We'll be glad to do it. But most of all, on the way out of town, we've got a beautiful outlet mall and some shops. And if you spend money here, it makes our schools better, safer, and it helps the sheriff have what he needs to make them safe. So please do your part for Dawson County today while you're here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. And I know it's good, man. Some folks ate breakfast in the pool room this morning.
Absolutely. Learned a lot of good local stuff, support this school.
And also our superintendent from Dawson, David Gibbs.
Welcome to Dawson County. We're blessed to be up here in the Northeast Georgia Mountains. This is a beautiful area of the state of Georgia. But we're also blessed to have a school system and a team in place that really has been doing work for many years and continues to do work for school safety. And our number one priority is, as Kevin said, is the safety of our children. And I want to do one quick introduction because if I don't, they won't be introduced. But Mr. Will Wade's here, one of our local board members, and Mr. Roger Slayton is here, another one of our board members. And we have a board of governance team that focuses on our students daily, and nothing is more important in Dawson County than the safety of our students. So we have a great relationship with our sheriff's department. We've been doing work with them, and we're excited to be able to talk about that a little bit today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here early, unlocking the door, coffee, and all that good stuff. But I'll get started. Speaker Ralston, when he gets here in a few minutes, will talk also. But I just had a few notes. As Mandy Ballinger and our co-chair is really of this, and we've talked about it for months, and we're just glad to be here. But the folks who are on the study committee across the state of Georgia have great interest in this. You know, I thought about it. We have people that are involved in education. Where Tommy been?
Out there.
Hey, Tommy, you're supposed to be up here. Hey, sit with us. Okay. In youth, Katie Dempsey is on it. She's been very involved in mental health. Folks in public safety who enjoy that. They're smart. And they're able to take on a serious subject. And I thank the speaker for letting us do this. I mean, this one is the first study committee of this year. None of the others have been appointed. I mean, that's how important I think the legislature knows the subject is to everybody. And we're on it first for the first study committee of this session and this year. And I'm glad he's letting us just get off and get going. Because our state's diverse. You know, I talked about we've got over 200 public schools and many more private ones. But like the superintendent said, about 10 million people in Georgia, the most important thing we have is public safety. Children in schools every day. And I'm like him. That's why we're here. And, you know, we're here because of the horrific events that have happened years ago. But this is something we thought has been important for a long time. You know, we passed House Bill 60 a few years ago that gave school systems the opportunity to arm certain teachers, people they choose in their school systems. We knew it was important then. Just this past year, we had a bill, we had a call from a sheriff in Middle Georgia. He says, hey man, I had somebody just call my school system wanting access to my school security plan. And he called us. He called his legislator, talked to us on public safety. And then that part of the bill to prohibit access to that was put into a bill that Randy Nix had, who is here. So we know it's important. We're acting quickly and we want to do that. How we'll do public comment. If you have something you want to say, shoot us. sign out to you earlier, a little nitty, but if you have a comment, you want to make something that today that you hear, write it down and give it to us. Because that's going to be in the record. We'll make sure all of our committee members get it. And that's, I think, the best way to do it is something like this. Chairman Balance, you have anything you'd like to add?
You covered it all.
So what we'll do, you'll see on the agenda, our next person is Gary McGivney. Gary, there you are. We thought it'd be good to find out from the state what's going on there. So Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I appreciate you coming to the beautiful Dawsonville this morning.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a handout you want us to pass out?
It's in the folder.
Sir, just mention.
I do.
Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Chairman Dasser, Vice Chair Ballinger, Representative Tanner, and other members of the committee. I'm Gary McGivney. I work for the Georgia Department of Education. But prior to going to the Department of Education, I worked in a large school system, and I was responsible for the development of safe school plans for 135 schools. I was also responsible for the development of the crisis management plan for the entire school district. And we were one of the first school systems in the state of Georgia to have all of our plans approved by GMA. That was not possible without us working with local law enforcement, local fire, local EMS, local EMA, local public health. All those entities were involved in developing the safe school plan and the crisis management plan. Also, I was part of development of what was, and I think still is, the largest school police department in the state. We had 65 SROs. We had 3 K9 units. We had an investigative unit. I've also testified.
We're trying to get you a little bit better. Do I?
I've also testified in court cases involving school safety. I've testified in civil court and criminal court on school safety issues. And I've been a trainer of school resource officers as well as school administrators. I worked in the school system long enough that I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly of what can happen in the school system. So I bring that with this information as well. And when I do training, I always start with what do we have currently. So I'd like to go through this very quick. I'm not going to read all these to you, but I just want you to see the depth and breadth of the laws in Georgia that are related directly to school safety. The legislature has been involved in school safety for a number of years, particularly after Columbine. And you'll see in this slide here, I'll just point out a couple of bullying. When Georgia revisited the bullying law a few years ago, there's an organization that looks at state laws related to bullying called Bullying USA. They rated Georgia's law as A+ because of the specificity of the law and because it also includes cyberbullying. And you'll see in this presentation in Georgia law and statute reference to Title 15, Title 16, Title 19, and Title 20 that are related in some way to school safety. On this, I'll just point out the development of the school safety plans. You'll see that in Title 20, 1185. And also school safety zones, and I'll talk more about school safety plans a little bit later. But each of these laws, I remember, and I've been in the legislature, working with the legislature a long time, each of these developed after a lot of discussion in committee meetings. They were not just haphazardly done and were not just a reaction to some incident. I'm also going to point out a little more information later about suicide prevention, and also you'll see on this slide, see the references to school climate. Georgia is one of the only and one of the first state legislatures to put school climate in state statute. So much so that other states and other departments of education started calling us to find out a little more insight on Georgia's legislature, including school climate in state law. That's not in very many other state statutes. And that's to the credit of the state legislature and the legislators listening to what school systems and teachers and administrators were telling them about how important school climate truly is. School climate, if you don't remember anything else I say today, which is a real possibility, remember this: school climate is related to school safety. We also see all the state laws in Georgia related to discipline. If you add all the laws that I just showed you the last few slides, there are 41 state statutes in Georgia related to school safety and the orderly conduct of school settings. 41. I've worked with Ron Stevens, who is the executive director of the National School Safety Center and has been for decades. We've worked together on a number of projects. And Dr. Stevens has testified before Congress 5 times about school safety. And he's been quoted as saying that you cannot legislate school safety. However, you can use state laws to create the conditions to improve school safety. Also, there's state board rules related to school safety. Some of those are in conjunction with the statutes related to school safety. And then, of course, there's some federal laws. I just point out these two, the Guns Free Act. But also, I want to point out the Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA, because there's something in ESSA that's relatively new from the U.S. Department of Education, the focus on school climate, the focus on internet safety, the focus on mental health, and a renewed focus on safety planning. I think it's also important, Chairman, for your committee to know what reports do we receive from school systems and what data elements do we have. All these categories are mandatory reporting categories for school systems to report to the Department of Education. In almost all these categories, we have to report up to the United States Department of Education. And the list continues. There are 35 categories that have to be reported to the Department of Education. And I thought the committee and the chairman would be interested in this data for the last 3 years. We've seen a decrease across the state. This is state data, so it will vary from district to district, of course. The statewide, we've seen a decrease in several areas: arson, bullying, larceny, and you see the rest of those. And we're talking about a significant decrease. But we've also seen an increase in academic dishonesty, computer trespass, which is becoming more and more a problem for local school systems, vandalism, and handguns. Now, I want to put the handguns in perspective. We received a report of over 170 handguns last year, but keep in mind we have 2,280 schools and 1.7 million students. And by comparison of other states, that is a pretty low percentage of handguns in our schools. I've been in hundreds of schools around the state and around the nation, and I can tell you from my experience, our schools are safer than they've ever been before, but there's still work to do. We administer the Georgia Student Health Survey to over 1 million students. You heard me right, 1 million students take the anonymous survey. And we have several questions on the survey. But Mr. Chair, I'll pull these three because they seem more related to what we're talking about today. The question is, I know what to do at school in an emergency. And it's encouraging that almost 90% of our students indicate they have some idea what to do in case there's an emergency. That means to me that the staff is talking to students about potential emergencies. Now, they're used to fire drills, and they're used to now, you talk to students 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and they didn't know what a lockdown was. Now most students know what the term lockdown means. It's almost a routine for them. So they're not frightened by it. In fact, they know what to do about it. And then, of course, we have the weather drills, too. Another question we think is important. I know an adult in school that asks for help. And why is that important? If there was one lesson that we all, educators that is, need to learn from Columbine, is that schools can have no secrets. We're not smart enough, ladies and gentlemen, we as adults are not smart enough to know everything that's going on in the school. And if you work in a school, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If we don't have a good relationship with the students so that they will tell us what's going on in the school, what students are in trouble, what students are saying to each other, if they don't come to us and tell us that, we're operating in the blind. So that question is very important. And we see it going up a little bit, but that needs to be in the range of 90% or higher. And then, of course, I feel safe at school. Over 80% of the students indicate that they do feel safe in school. Some resources from the Georgia Department of Education. These are school safety resources that we have developed over several years with many partners, including GEMA. We collaborate so well with GEMA, I feel like we're at the point of convergence. It's a seamless working relationship with GEMA. They're great to work with, and Chairman, they respond immediately any phone call. If I can get somebody on the phone from GEMA at the highest level right now, if I pick up the phone. If I can't get them then, they will call back in 5 minutes. It's an amazing relationship. And I can't say that's the case in some states where there's state emergency management organization, but here's some of the resources that we certainly didn't develop alone. These resources were developed with the help from GEMA, from FEMA, from a number of local emergency management agencies at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level. And you go on our website and you can click on any of these. Just an example is the Crisis Management Prevention in Georgia manual. That's updated frequently, but it's on our website. It's available to anybody. It's available to citizens. It's available to parents. And when I talk to parent groups, sometimes we have copies of this, Mr. Chairman, so they'll see what's going on in their school. And you can see the 4 primary categories that the experts in this area always talk about: prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And these are some of the areas that are included. And this is a checklist primarily for most school systems. When they have their development of their safe school plan, they're going to have something in their safe school plan in these categories, in these areas. So you see that it's a comprehensive list. School safety is complex. School safety is far-reaching. School safety is not just one area. And that's one reason why you cannot depend on just one area of expertise when you're developing your safe school plan. You have to include everybody who knows a lot about all of these areas of concerns. Stadium evacuation, that became an issue many years ago. And at that time, everybody thought very little about how to evacuate a stadium. And I remember the school system that I worked in, we thought, well, we'll call the experts together and tell us how to evacuate a stadium. We didn't think it would take very long to do that or have that meeting. But that's a very complex process, especially if there may be a secondary device in the parking lot. And also you have citizens going to the exit at the same time the parents are heading to the field, because that's where their children are. So you have cross-pattern exits, and the safety experts in the room will tell you that's the worst case scenario. So we learned a lot by depending on the experts to tell us how to do things like evacuate a stadium. GEMA, and we tell schools this all the time, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chairman, that GEMA offers an abundant number of courses for school systems that are free. Active shooter, and they have been receiving a lot of requests for that training. Bomb threat management, bomb threat search techniques, bullying prevention, cafeteria safety, current trends in drug use in schools, emergency operation planning for schools, and the list goes on. They'll do a threat assessment in the schools too. We're asked to do school safety site assessments. We've been to 100 schools across the state and do a site assessment, and GEMA always sends someone to come with us, Mr. Chairman. Always. They have never failed to send someone who's an expert on safety site assessments. And we do a very thorough site assessment. It's not uncommon for the principal of the school to say, you know, I've never been to that part of the building. Because we go into every corner, every part of the building, the closets, the storage rooms. There's a catwalk, we climb the steps and go up to the catwalk. We go into every part of that building. We go into the stadium, we go into the gym, everywhere. And to try to do a comprehensive study so that we can give written feedback to the school system. We give written feedback within 30 days. And I can tell you, and I think this is encouraging, they will give us an update within usually 6 months to let us know their reaction to our recommendations. And almost every time they have adopted all the recommendations. And many times they'll say, you know, we see this every day, but we have never really thought about it. So a lot of it is just awareness from a different perspective. But we also tell them this, that you can have all the security you want, you can have the most sophisticated security system, you can have all the exterior doors locked, you can have the cameras in the right place, you can have the monitors in the right place, but if one staff member props the back door open with a rock, that's compromise. And the reason I say that, ladies and gentlemen, is because we can talk about hardware all we want to, but the human element will always be the most important component of school safety. Always has been, always will be. We have a conference each year, and I want to invite all of you to attend the conference. This is the 9th conference we've had, Safety in Our Schools Conference. The Department of Education works with GEMA, Homeland Security, and also the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Middle District of Georgia. You can see just a sample of some of the topics that we have. Mr. Speaker, good morning.
Go ahead.
You can see some of the topics that we have scheduled this year, and the topics are determined by the audience, and we will have 400 to 500 administrators, SROs, and others attend the conference, and you're welcome to attend. Just quickly, I want to go through some legislation this year, particularly House Bill 763, sponsored by Representative Nix, because it includes some very powerful perspective and also what we can use to move forward in Georgia. If you're familiar with the Attendance Protocol Committee, it's been in law for a long time, the Student Attendance Protocol Committee, where it's the local Superior Court judges to convene local jurisdictions and to come together to talk about student attendance. It's been in existence for a good while. 763 added school climate to that topic so that all these entities, and look at this is the power of local support. This is the power of local collaboration right here. And you think of a more powerful list. Now all these people are going to be coming together to talk about not only student attendance, but also school climate. Which means they will also be talking about what? School safety. That's important. In fact, one of the charges of this protocol committee now would be to review the school climate ratings. In Georgia, state law requires every school in Georgia to have a school climate rating. The first state in the nation to require school climate rating. And what is school climate rating? This also gets into the opinion of students and staff about not only safety, but also about the conditions that create those safe terms. And these are the 4 elements that create the school climate rating. So it's not just dependent on discipline data or the reporting of data, it's also dependent on that survey that I told you about earlier, as well as attendance data and questions from the survey that have been found to be directly related to school safety. The committee, also with 763, could recommend the use of positive behavior interventions and supports as the framework for improving school climate. A lot of school systems around the nation are coming to realize school climate is critical. School climate is everywhere. Climate is everywhere. The business world figured this out a long time ago, the ones that are successful. If you read the Harvard Business Review from December 2015, where they studied successful businesses that were successful over a long period of time, they narrowed it down to this. Workplace climate was the #1 predictor of sustainability of a business that was successful. Schools have been a little bit slow coming to realize the importance of climate. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. You can't get away from climate. You cannot deny that climate exists because it is always there. And it's time for schools to start taking that more seriously, and that's what the school climate rating is all about. The National School Climate Center gives you the definition of school climate. But when I talk to parents and other audiences, you know what I tell them? So you can read this definition, but when you walk out the door, you're going to forget that definition, aren't you? Most likely. So you know what I talk about school climate? I tell them, pause for just a minute and think about your high school. Your memory of high school is school climate. That's how powerful it is. School climate stays with you for a lifetime. Your memory of high school is not math. It's not science. It's not social studies. Your memory of high school is school climate. Either you felt safe or you didn't. You felt connected or you did not. You felt left out or you felt like you were part of it. All that, ladies and gentlemen, is school climate. And that's the human element that you can't get away from, you can't move away from, and should not move away from when you're talking about safety, whether it's in a school or anywhere else. These are the 4 components of school climate. You can see the safety, the relationships, the teaching, learning, and the institutional environment. In a very powerful study done by the RAND Corporation, they found that school climate is the only school characteristic that consistently correlates with school violence after taking into account other school features. School climate. School climate. And the research is developing all around the world about the importance of school climate and how it relates to safety conditions. So how do you improve school climate? We did a lot of research and found out that positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS, is the best research-based framework for improving school climate. Why? Because it looks at the entire school, not just the components of the school. It realizes that a school is a system. And one part of the system impacts the other part of the system. So you can't approach it in isolation. You have to look at the entire school when you're talking about making a school safe, not just one component of it. In Georgia, there's a map of schools that trained, the orange is 90 to 100% of their schools have been trained in PBIS. I don't know why it says value, but anyway, it's supposed to be 1,160 schools have been trained in PBS, and that's up from 80 in 2009. So we're now up to 93 school districts. Georgia's now among the top 5 among all states in the number of schools trained in school-wide PBIS. What that means is 670,000 students are in PBS schools, an increase of 400,000 since 2015. So on this chart, you'll see as we increase the number of schools implementing PBIS, you'll see the pretty dramatic decrease in the number of out-of-school suspensions. It's a 34% reduction of out-of-school suspensions. When I show this information in national conferences, they want my business card because they're not seeing these types of reductions. in other parts of the United States because they're not implementing PBS at the rate that we're implementing PBS. And we have the data. In fact, I can send you, Mr. Chairman and Sarah, research that just came out last month. A national organization looked at Georgia's data a national organization looked at Georgia's data, not us looking at it. We have our own data that shows a dramatic decrease in out-of-school suspensions, increase in students feeling safe at school. But this national organization found out that Georgia's PBIS is being implemented with fidelity, and they showed that discipline issues have gone down significantly across the state. But I also want to show you this. It's not just school safety that's important, as you see PBS implementation going up and out-of-school suspensions going down, but also the graduation is going up. Now, I cannot stand here and tell you that there is a causation, but I sure can tell you there is a correlation. And that's why we need to get all schools in Georgia, all 2,280, we're about halfway there implementing PBS, to recognize the importance of school climate and its relationship to safety as well. This is important, Representative Nix, that schools shall provide for coordination with local law enforcement agencies and the local juvenile court. And the bill indicated what needs to be included in the Safe School Plan. This is excellent input for a local school system when they're reviewing their Safe School Plan. But it does require mandatory training. And the training is, you see, it's not limited to resource officers, but also security officers, secretaries, custodians, bus drivers, etc. One area of a school, and I'm sure the superintendent would agree with this, that we often overlook is the front office. The front office of a school, now that in this day and age, we, as a school administrator, we're funneling all of the visitors to the front door, as it should be. You should not be able to get into a school any other way through the front door. So in effect, the front office becomes the command center. And the training for the front office staff cannot be overlooked. And that's why we're glad that in this bill, it includes attention to people other than teachers, administrators, and school resource officers. I also want to point out the requirement of mental health awareness training that's in the bill. I've been in the business long enough to know that I can get you a Time magazine about every 3 years going back for the last 20 years that talks about an incident that happened in a school, a shooting. This is the first time that I can remember after the Parkland tragedy, this is the first time I can remember where the topic is just not about metal detectors and surveillance cameras. The topic now includes mental health. That's the sea change, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about school safety and school climate. And now's the time for us to take advantage of that, because you're back to the human element that will always be there when we talk about school safety. So the bill requires mental health awareness training. And it's amazing how news travels, because Representative Nix, I've already received calls from 2 other states wanting a copy of the bill because of the mental health awareness training that's required in the Safe School Plan. You need to know, ladies and gentlemen, students' unmet mental health needs can be a significant obstacle to safety. Representative Dempsey has chaired at least 3 committees on mental health issues that involve or included children, and that data just keeps coming up time and time again. To a lot of people's surprise, mental illness is one of the top 5 health conditions for children in the United States. 26% of children in the United States will witness or experience a traumatic event before they turn the age of 4. And that traumatic experience they bring with them to school. Schools are often one of the first places where mental health crisis and mental health needs of students are recognized and initially addressed. It frequently shows up first in schools. And if we don't do something about it, the research shows the mental illness deteriorates. So what can we do about it? What is Georgia doing about it? A nationally known researcher Dr. Segay said a positive school climate helps children that are struggling with family issues, trauma, personal adjustment issues, because a sense of safety and security is therapeutic. We have PBS, as I mentioned before, and that is not possible for us to have expanded that, Mr. Chairman, if not for the help from the legislature. You put the money in so that we could put a school climate specialist at each of the 16 RISCs to decentralize the effort. We want the effort to be at the local level, and the RISCs have really come through. They have really worked hard to expand the implementation of PBS and have the larger discussion about the importance of school climate. We also have Youth Mental Health First Aid through a grant we got, a federal grant through Project Aware, making people aware of the mental health issues and what to look for, so that their referral for a student, Representative Dempsey, instead of going to the discipline office, now goes to the counseling office. There's a difference. Signals 1 is the development of mental health awareness by the National Alliance of Mental Illness for young children. We don't think about mental illness when we're talking about K through 5, do we? But that is an issue as well, and we have to have teachers trained in those grade levels to be able to recognize when a child's in trouble and what to do about it. Apex project is putting mental health therapists in schools. Think how difficult it is for a parent to go to a school, get off work, go to school, pick up their child, and take them, if they can find a therapist in the community, how difficult that is, and how really, if I may say this, how unrealistic that really is. So why not bring the therapist to the school? And because of the legislature and because the governor has now put millions of dollars into Apex, which started out as a one-year pilot project, but it's shown to be successful. Because of that commitment by the state, that project will continue. And we have enough money invested in it that it will expand. Suicide prevention, you probably remember the Jason Flack Act, sponsored Katie Dempsey a few years ago. As soon as that bill passed, we went right into action. In fact, we already started having discussions about how to do suicide prevention training before the bill even passed. And you see all the partners there? You see all the partners, ladies and gentlemen? We can't do this without the partners. And we've trained thousands of people in the prevention, suicide prevention. The numbers are still troubling. So we now have brought in the technical college system of Georgia because we have 30,000 dual enrollment students going to technical college and USG colleges. And those issues now are presenting themselves at that level. So we've expanded the suicide prevention training to the technical colleges, and the next 4 training sessions will be at 4 technical colleges in North, Central, South, West, and East Georgia. And the technical college have committed to, and they're very interested in training their own staff as well. Trauma-informed schools, we work with the Child Welfare Training Consortium, which is a combination of state agencies and advocates and non-government organizations, to find out what can we do with a growing number of students who are coming to school with post-traumatic stress syndrome from trauma, exposure to trauma. And we can develop trauma-informed schools from that. And that is a natural progression that we have seen in those schools implementing, Mr. Chairman, PBIS. The next step, they're ready. The conditions are there in those schools for additional training, for the mental health awareness training, for the trauma-informed training. They're ready for that because we have seen that you change the entire system of a school when they've improved the climate, it becomes a little system of care. The teachers care more about each other. They care more about the students. They're more engaged with the students and with each other. They're more likely to talk about issues. They're more likely to be creative in solving issues. They're more likely to be frank about issues. But at the same time, they're more demanding for the need for resources. And we have to continue to come through. The Second Step Violence Prevention Program, Dfacs, you may not know this, but Dfacs every year gives grants to local school systems to implement the Second Step program, which is research-based, and it's been proven to reduce the incidence of violence. What they have found, Dfacs has found, schools that are implementing PBIS, this grant works best in those schools. So understand, I need to say this parenthetically, but I think it's foundational, is that PBIS does not solve your problems.
I don't want to give that impression. PBIS does not solve any problems. PBIS creates the conditions so that you can solve those problems. You have to have a foundation of safety and security in a school before you can address problems. And that's what the value is of PBS. You have to have that foundation of safety before you can move to the next step. In the budget, you remember I showed you in House Bill 763 that mental health awareness training is part of the Safe School Plan requirement. It wasn't an unfunded mandate because the legislature put money, $1.6 million in the budget for student mental health awareness training. And we're working now with the RESAs on how to start training every teacher in the state of Georgia on mental health awareness, K through 12. There's no other state doing that. So it's something to be proud of. But I say that this is just the beginning. There's so much more to do. Also in the legislature was money put to augment the BHDD's crisis access line, which would be part of the student mental health awareness training. That makes sense, right, to connect those. And for those of you who don't know what that crisis line is, because everybody in the room will at some time know somebody who will need to call this line. You need to pass this number out in your community and in your workplace. Somebody answers the phone. Also at the DOE, we have a safety crisis hotline. We have a staff member who answers this phone, and when he is not available, it shifts over to the Department of Public Safety. Any student, any teacher, anybody who calls the hotline talks to somebody. That's important. And we get calls. That's an active phone line. And also the governor released this press release, see something, send something recently. This is getting into looking at social media. This is getting into citizen responsibility. This is getting into student responsibility. This is getting into civil responsibility. If you go on the Dawson School System website, what do you see on the website, Mr. Superintendent? You see, if you see something, say something in this school system. And this school system, I don't know if you know, but Dawson has one of the highest graduation rates in the state. But they see, as the superintendent said, safety is still number one. Also, I just want to mention that the combination of technology and also the human element that we're talking about before, so that school systems now can apply for the grant that was afforded by the legislature. We're already looking at the procedures and the process of reviewing those applications for the grant that came from the bond, that together is now $16 million, 5-year bonds. Recommendations. Mr. Chairman, I learned a long time ago if you're going to speak to a House study committee, you want to have recommendations. So we have a few. Ensure that current funding continues and enhanced funding is considered. To expand PBS, continue to expand Apex to more and more schools, expand mental health awareness to everyone, educators, SOs, parents, volunteers, communities, everybody in this room. Expand suicide prevention training for everyone in this room. Expand trauma-informed training for schools. Harrison County has a pilot program called WATCH. It's a part of the national program Handle with Care. And this is a very interesting concept, Representative Nix, because if a social worker gets a call from a family that Gary had a rough night with the family was up all night because there was a crisis in the family, that social worker will call the school and say, Gary had a difficult night, his behavior may not be the best today, you may want to handle him with care. Local law enforcement goes to a house on a domestic call in the middle of the night, the child got no sleep, but comes to school the next day, the law enforcement officer will call the school and say, I can't tell you everything that happened at that house, but I just want to let you know that one of your students, Gary McGivney, you may want to handle him with care today because he may be out of sorts. What we're seeing in that simple gesture is this. A kid who comes to school and overreacts because he's been up all night, been traumatized all night, overreacts, gets into a fight, what happens? Suspended, expelled, and the issue is not dealt with. This simple act of connecting The different agencies that intersect with the life of a child can make the difference in the life of that child. Expand drug education to confront the opioid crisis. We have a training session scheduled at the Georgia Association of Educators this summer, and it's the opioid crisis and impact it has on schools. We're already starting to see the impact on schools. Not so much students using the opioids, but the adults in the family using the opioids and how that impacts the children when they come to school. And also expand the second step prevention program. That was the kind of the hardware, if you will, the human factor, those recommendations. And now, Mr. Chairman, these are more of the hardware recommendations. And I won't read all these to you, but you can see that it's important for a school system to have all the doors secured, have surveillance cameras in the right place, have the monitors in the right place. I went to a school that had 107 cameras. Had the monitor in the closet. Nobody's looking at the cameras. The only reason they had the system in place was for investigation after something happened. Cameras can be used for prevention. They can be used for intervention. Card access systems, architectural experts looking at floor plans. We are a strong advocate of the crime prevention through environmental design standards. We want to encourage local school systems to use CPTED when they're developing schools. We all want schools to look nice and pretty and be attractive, but more importantly, we want them to be safe. And design has a lot to do with that. I went to a school system in Florida, and guess who has the final say on the design of a new school or the remodeling of a new school? Guess who has the final say, Chairman? The police chief. The police chief of the school system and the police chief of local law enforcement. Those two have the final say on remodeling and the building of new schools. Additional recommendations, I don't know if you've heard of Stop the Bleed training, but we're now up to 800 schools that have implemented Stop the Bleed training, and they have the kits. Stop the Bleed training is just what it is. It teaches all staff members how to stop the bleed. Now, the intention of that was in case there's more than one incident, because we have staff typically trained on how to do that with maybe one isolated incident, but what if you have multiple injuries? Stop the Bleed is intended for multiple injuries. There was a school nurse recently in North Georgia who saved the life of a child who fell and broke her arm on a low playground device, but the broken bone punctured an artery. She would have bled out in 7 minutes. The Stop the Bleed saved her life. We're now up to 800 schools. We need to have Stop the Bleed in all 2,280 schools. Neighborhood watch programs, we haven't heard much about that anymore. I can remember there was a time when that was very active in schools, but we kind of drifted away from that. We want to encourage the school systems to be incentivized for neighborhood watch programs or something similar to that. And consider the presence of school resource officers, local police, security guards as intervention and response, but require that they have the training necessary to understand what they're getting into when they're talking about working with young adults. The school resource department that I operated many, many years ago, we had 65 officers, and they had to go through training. They had to have at least 5 years of experience working with youth before they could even apply for the job. The alert system, as we mentioned earlier, those can be very valuable, but perhaps there's a way, Mr. Chairman, for the state to contract with a provider so that the local school system can bid off of that state contract. They could save a lot of money, and we could expand the use of the alert system. And utilize the newly formed Governor School Leadership Academy to train school principals on school safety, what school safety really means, crisis response and practices. And finally, I just want to say, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Vice Chairman, that school safety is very complex. One strategy is not going to get you where you need to be. If you focus just on metal detectors, somebody has to man the metal detectors. Somebody has to calibrate the metal detectors. So you're still back to the human element. If you can put in all the surveillance cameras you want, but unless you put them in the right place and somebody's monitoring them, you're back to the human element. So it's going to take a combination of attention to all these elements here for schools to be as safe as we want them to be. And also, look at it this way, when you include all these elements and everyone in the room in this collaborative effort, there's not anything that we can't accomplish. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Checking our committee members, there's a microphone here. Let me have a question before we let the speaker talk to us. Did anybody have any? Right, go ahead. That's great.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I do have a question. In all of the research or the business you had dealing with school safety and security, were there any places where there might have been a civil parent patrol kind of similar to what you talked about with neighborhood watch, where the parents are actually, parent or community members were in the schools on patrol doing the hallways?
Yes, we've seen, they call it different things, but it was a volunteer program. And in fact, I've seen that in quite a few schools more recently than there was a time, as a lull over the last 5 or 10 years where I didn't see that much, but it seems to be coming back. But you know what I think is related to is once you improve, and I know you're getting tired of me saying this, but it's so true. Once you improve school climate, parents feel more welcome at school, and when they feel more welcome at school, they're more likely to want to volunteer to do things like being a watchful eye for security purposes. And yes, I'm seeing more and more schools utilizing parents and other volunteers, not just parents, but other community volunteers, kind of going back to that parent watch, civilian watch, used to be called different things, neighborhood watch many years ago, where you'd go in the neighborhood and see in the window of homes, this is a neighborhood watch house, so if a student had an emergency, they knew they could run to that house for assistance. Fortunately, I think we're coming back to that, but it's a really good point that we can do more of that and should encourage more of that.
Second question. We talked about mental health evaluations for the students. What about for our administrators and teachers? Is there any tests or anything that are done for teachers or administrators who are hired? You kind of testing their mental capacity as well?
Some school systems have the Employee Assistance Program, EAPs, and that's where that would come into play. The Employee Assistance Program is where the school system contracts with a CMO, a care management organization, to include care management organization, mental health therapy, for example, mental health evaluation for their employees. But more and more school systems, I think, are revisiting now that QBE has been restored. They're now looking at other things that they used to do, such as the Employee Assistance Program. And we had the school system I worked in, we had the Employee Assistance Program, and it was utilized quite a bit and was very effective. And it's saved the career. And really, I would say, even say this, saved some families from going through difficult times because they had access to those services.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. I have some chairs in that back room right there if we might pull a few out. But some folks might need to see. Go back to the legislative session. It's all really busy. Speaker talked to me one day about doing this study committee. And we're all here because of his leadership. And I appreciate him, he knows that. But I'd like to also use the study committee to talk to us.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Jaspers, and to the members of the study committee. I want to thank all of you for agreeing to serve. I don't know that I asked any of you. I just told you were going to. But I felt like this was a group that could do the best job, and so I think we have the right combination of people. Well, good morning to all of you. Good morning. As I begin, I want to welcome you all, and I want to say a special word of thanks to the Dawson County School System and Superintendent Dr. Damon Gibbs for hosting today's meeting. Welcome to North Georgia. You drive about 5 miles to the west from here, and you will be in the best House District in Georgia, House District 7. So I hope you get over there. Well, I'll be leaving as soon as I'm finished to go back up. We have the Rural Development Council meeting in Blue Ridge tomorrow and Wednesday, and because it is an election year and because it is the springtime, I am running in a race again. So I'm kind of getting used to that, I think. I want to thank the local officials that are here. And are there any legislators that are not on the study committee that are here? Got a number of local officials. I will not try to name them all, but I appreciate all of them being here and appreciate their service. We have come here today to continue a very important discussion on the safety and security of Georgia's public schools. I am very, very proud that the House led the conversation on school security this past session by budgeting $8 million to go directly to local school systems to secure their campuses. I'm even more proud to report that after we did that the Senate joined us by allotting an additional $8 million to this very worthy cause. That's a total of $16 million in the fiscal year 2019 state budget that will be divided amongst our systems according to a formula based on student enrollment. As an example, here in Dawson County, that will mean some almost $50,000 from the state to purchase equipment like metal detectors, camera and security systems, hardened doors, and locks for schools. It will be up to the local boards of education and superintendents to determine how best to use their allotment, and that's the way it should be. But as we all know, while money certainly helps, it is not the only thing we should do to secure our schools. This topic involves a myriad of public policy issues, from budget and campus planning to training, counseling, and other resources necessary to keep our schools and our children safe. That's why the House of Representatives adopted House Resolution 1414 this past session to establish this very important study committee on school security. And even though we have other important study committees and councils at work, including rural development and transit, it is my view that this year this is going to be a high priority of the House of Representatives. I want to thank Chairman Jaspers for sponsoring that resolution, and I want to thank the other House members who put this issue at the forefront and took a leadership role, including the chairman of our Juvenile Justice Committee, Chairman Mandy Ballinger from Canton, and Representative Heath Clark from Warner Robins, who was a real leader on this issue. To all the members of the committee, I know for some of you, getting here today required traveling a great distance, in addition to being away from your homes, families, and businesses. Please know that I appreciate your service to the House of Representatives and to our state. Among the ranks of the members of this committee, we find a diversity of political party, geography, and life experience. But I want it noted that each of you brings to this committee a valuable perspective. Among you, we have experts in law enforcement, education, mental health, and juvenile justice. It is with that framework in mind that I charge you to meet with educators, school board members, and other leaders all across this state. Listen to their concerns and consider and weigh their input. This is not an effort by the state to interfere with local governance and control of schools. Rather, this is simply a way to see if we can help local school districts ensure the safety of their staff and students. With that, I will conclude my remarks. I wish you well in your important work and look forward to getting reports from all of your meetings, and wish you safe travels as you go around the state. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
One thing I didn't do, I apologize to the committee very much. They've all got here now. So I did introduce, if I would like for them to get to stand up, turn around to all these great folks here, tell them where you're from, what you're interested in, and just for good measure. Brian, please start with you.
I'm Representative Brian Prince, and I'm in Augusta, Georgia. I have parts of Richmond County, which is mainly Augusta. I also have a rural area called Jefferson County. I've been serving about 5 years, and thank you for that.
Steve.
Katie Dempsey, I'm from Rome, representing House District 13. I'm privileged to work on the budget that is affected by many of these issues right here, and to have been thrust by my speaker into working on it heavier than I thought I would actually do. What a rewarding experience it is to see Dr. McGivney here and to realize how much you have worked with us. I am grateful to be a part of this conversation.
Heath Clark, District 147, which is in Warner Robins, Georgia. Vice Chairman of Public Safety, and I have a wife who's an educator, and 4 young kids who, over the next 20 years, are going to be in public schools. So I have a personal interest in this matter as well as a public interest.
Good morning, I'm Valencia Stovall, House District 74, in Clayton County. I'm serve on the Education Committee. Very involved and very interested in this subject matter. Excited to see you all here and looking forward to hearing feedback to see how we can move forward.
I'm Amy Ballinger, represent District 23, which is over in Cherokee County. Geographically, I'm about half of Cherokee County. I have chair of juvenile justice in the House, which is that wonderful nexus of youth in our state, child welfare, child development, mental health issues, criminal justice issues. We kind of deal with all that hot mess. So I look forward to working with each and every one of you as we work to find solutions to make our children safer every morning.
Thank you.
I'm Tommy Bennett. I'm Jefferson. I represent House District 31, which is most of Jackson County. I serve on several committees. Some of them deal with the budget, others deal directly with education. I am a retired educator.
State Representative Andy Lumsden. I represent District 12, which is northern and western Floyd County, a portion of Rome, and all of Chattooga County. I'm a retired state trooper by profession. I serve on our Public Safety Committee as well as Chair of Human Relations and Aging and a number of other committees that sort of intersect with what we're trying to accomplish here. So just very pleased to be here with you today and look forward to getting some good recommendations from us.
Hi, I'm Randy Nix. I'm from House District 69. It goes from LaGrange, Carrollton, Trooper, and Carroll counties. I've been engaged in on the Education Committee now for about 8 years, and the things we're talking about are the things I've worked on with PBIS. I got engaged with that early, trying to bring that to the school system. I've been an advocate for that. I got engaged in the House bill he was talking about this year that elevates school climate to a level which I think it needs to be. There's so much there. As I said, when we looked at the protocol for attendance where he showed you all of the officials there, from school officials to law enforcement to mental health. That was already in statute that they had to meet to talk about attendance. Well, if you're going to attend, you want to make sure what you're attending is worthwhile, so that's where the school climate piece came in. And I appreciate the efforts of all of the people that are here, your interest, and look forward to seeing this grow and see if there are other ways we can enhance the safety and security of our schools. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, we need our law enforcement, our sheriffs. I have 4 sheriffs that have got you a place up here. Come on. Sheriff Ralston, Sheriff Craig, Sheriff Johnson, and Kirby. And if I just get the media's attention, I guess I was sitting here thinking, listening to what Dr. Gibbons said while they're getting set up here. Find your microphone, guys. Get your water. So I think when I watch the news, I read what's in the news, I don't think that y'all represent the things that he said very well. That the in-depth look at what's going on today. I hope y'all take recognition of that. I think you'll hear that echo from what we hear from sheriffs, what we hear from school board members, is that we think it's darn important. And it's not just one little thing, but it's a broad thing. And so, guys, you guys have insight better than any of us do, where the rubber meets the road. I think you'll all will recognize that. And I asked them when I was talking to all of them, just tell us what you think. You know, you see where the school safety and public safety intersect. What's going on? What do you think? What should we think about doing as a committee? Or things that we need to change, law-wise, statute-wise, vision that you see this thing going to? Who's responsible? Dollars? Say whatever you want to. And any particular order?
I'll start.
Sit here. Just tell them who you are. I mean, I know, but slow again.
Gordon County Sheriff, Mitch Ralston, Gordon County, Northwest Georgia.
Just 35, 40 miles south of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Great community, community of about 60,000 people. I'm currently responsible for protecting around 12 schools. We want to focus, we talk a lot about high schools, and we talk little about the elementary schools. And being here just this short amount of time, I've already learned something, and that's about the climate. And we talked about school climate. That's very important. But us in law enforcement, we think about the climate of our community, the climate of our nation at this point in time in our lives. That's the demon that threatens us. And that's something we think about every day. This all boils down to funding. That's it. Every day I wake up and these schools are open, it's my responsibility to make sure that our kids are there safe and they return home safe. It's a big responsibility. It's stressful. You try to partner, and we do partner with our school board and our superintendents. But at the end of the day, it comes down to funding and personnel. And who funds that? Is it the Board of Commissioners? Is it the school board? We're about maxed out when it comes to the school board. Is it fair for me to demand that the school board fund 24 officers, 2 per school? And I'm not just talking about the high schools, I'm talking about the elementary schools. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, if you could, because we're dealing with a lot of things across the state, in my county, in Cherokee County, we have, our school district has its own school police department. So whenever y'all are making your remarks, if you could just comment upon what your structure is, do you have SROs? How exactly does that look in your county? Because we are dealing with different issues and different components across the state. You know, like I said, my sheriff's office doesn't go into any schools. So, you know, if you could just comment upon your structure, what it looks like in your...
Well, and that's my point. It depends on funding. So, yeah, I would love it if the school board would have their own police department. That way the sheriffs don't have to fool with it. It's very rare that we can hire an officer that wants to be a school resource officer. That's a big problem too. But it is my responsibility to make sure that my community is safe. And when the schools are not funding any school resource officers, guess who's got to direct traffic on Highway 53 for the kids in the school buses to get out? I do. Nobody has asked me to do that, but I do it. We do have a good working relationship with the schools, but it all boils down to money and funding, and that's something that, we're just going to have to work through. But my main point was the climate. It's not just school climate. It's not just students. It's teachers also that law enforcement has to look at, because we've arrested teachers too. I know the schools don't want to talk about students, it's all about the students. It's not. When in a law enforcement mindset, it's everybody that's entering onto that campus, and it's a task that we take seriously. So I'll turn it over to somebody else.
Just follow up with what you asked, Sheriff. So Gordon County Schools has some SR, they have
I furnish 3.
for the whole system.
Yes.
How many people do you have on average a day involved, like in traffic control and such?
As far as the schools, or?
Yeah, but just in traffic control around the schools,
Well, they're spread out all over the county. So when we direct traffic is in front of Sonorville High School, and there's three structures, 3 buildings on that campus. There's an elementary school, a high school, and then there was a middle school, but now they've turned it into a part of the high school. So the Sonorville area, that's where we direct most of the traffic. And we have a elementary school and a middle school in Redbud that we do school traffic, and then we have another high school at Gordon Central that we assist in traffic. So right now, we've got 2 officers in the high schools. That's what the superintendent wanted. And then we have a supervisor that floats, and he goes all over the county to different schools. Yeah.
Well, good morning. My name is Jeff Johnson. I'm the sheriff here in Dawson County. We have a full-service law enforcement sheriff's office here, which means we have no city police departments. We handle all of our schools through our school resource officers. We have a very good working relationship with our school board, with our superintendent. I want to tell you a few of the things that we feel like we're doing right, that we have going good for us. But we also have some obstacles as well, I think, that we need to address, and especially for the committee. Just this year, we will have, we're blessed to be able to say that we have a school resource officer in every school that we have. We have 8 schools in Dawson County. When our new school year starts this fall, we'll have a school resource officer in every year, in every school. However, saying that, obviously we're dealing with people. Family emergencies come up, personal illness comes up, things of that nature. So it's still working in predominantly rural county. Our resources are limited, and our patrol resources are limited. What does that mean? That means if a school resource officer is out for some reason or another, chances are that school is going without some type of law enforcement representation on that particular day. We do our best to try to limit the time that they're away from our schools. One thing that our school board did, and how it's handled here, is predominantly we have 50% split with the school board and 50% split with the board of commissioners. This year, as a matter of fact, beginning next year, up until this point, we were having to pull our school resource officers away from our schools to do traffic direction. Now, through a split with the county and the school board, we're hiring off-duty law enforcement officers to handle our school traffic, thereby allowing us to keep our SROs in the school further and longer. Having said that, we have a good partnership with our school. Mr. Rick Brown's here with our school safety board. We're allowing access to our police officers, to our patrol officers, to have access to our schools through their secure doors, things of that nature. We do have copies of the school security plans. We try to encourage our patrol officers to go by our schools to make sure that they go in and they are very familiar with the layout of the schools, how things are, the layout, the activities, things of that nature. But again, if we talk about some of our downsides, we are limited. We have potential vacancies in our SROs, again, through personal illness, things of that nature. We've got a lot of good things going for us in Dawson County, but we do have some issues. We do have some areas that obviously additional funding would help with. listened to Mr. McGivney's statements earlier when he talks about the climate. I too will echo that. One thing I think that probably all the sheriffs up here could agree on is jail climate's a good comparison with that. When you walk into the jail and you understand how the climate is, it's going to, be reflective of how the jail is run, if it's orderly, if it's safe, and I'm sure the same principles apply for the school systems. And I'll say this as well, to applaud our school board and our school administrators. They're not bashful to, and I don't mean this bad to air dirty laundry, but a lot of things I think in the past, if we keep it quiet, it reflects better on our schools. Well, obviously we have to accept, we have to make it known when things happen in our schools, how else are we going to be able to address them. We talk about mental health issues in schools. I agree with that with our school resource officers. Now, how it is in Dawson County, typically our SROs are in school when schools are in sessions. When teachers are out and there's no students available is when they have the opportunity to take their leaves, when they have the opportunity to do certain things. So we're limited in being able to afford them additional training. So if that's an option, if we see that we're going to have some additional mental health training for our school resource officers, maybe we could make that during the summertime when most schools are out. And I know there's not much of a summer break now, but if we could kind of make that during that period, it would help us out at least with our staffing wise.
Thank you. I'm Sheriff Kirby, Dane Kirby from Fannin County, which is Blue Ridge, Georgia. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate y'all being willing to put this committee together to come and try to resolve some of these issues. And like Mitch said, as sheriffs, we feel like that, the weight of the world is kind of on our shoulders when it comes to protecting these schools, and it can get pretty overwhelming sometimes. But we also understand that there's a whole lot more to making schools safe and secure, like the gentleman pointed out in his presentation earlier there, that us sheriffs really have no knowledge of. It's not really our area of expertise, if you will, and we really do appreciate y'all taking the time to put this very organized and complete group of people together to look at this thing as a whole and try to make a difference that shows. We're all nervous and scared to death that something bad's going to happen on our watch, which none of us want to. We don't want that to be the case, but the reality is that nobody's immune, and it could happen. So we all have to be ready for that, and I feel like that we are as ready as we can be. I have a real good relationship with these guys up here, and I feel like we're all kind of in the same boat. In Fannin County, we only have 5 schools. We have a high school, a middle school, and 3 elementary schools. And we have 1 resource officer in each one of those. The Board of Education funds 2 of those. The Board of Commissioners through the Sheriff's Office funds 2 of those. And the City of Blue Ridge funds 1. 3 of our schools, our high school, our middle school, and 1 of our elementary schools are actually located inside the City of Blue Ridge. So they stepped up to the plate there, since they did have so many of the schools inside their city limits, and helped us fund 1, so that was helpful. Like the sheriff there pointed out, even though you do have an officer assigned to a school, they have obligations that pull them away from that school sometimes. So on the surface, it sounds like that you have somebody there all the time, but in reality, you don't. We're in discussion now with our school superintendent, and I have our safety superintendent, Mr. Benny Long, with me here today. Just talking about ideas and things that might be helpful, and we have talked about additional school resource officers in our schools to try to give us a little relief, to make sure that there is somebody there all the time. And, in order for that to really become a reality, we would have to add 1 to each school, ideally. But there's all kinds of ideas out there. One thing that Fannin County has done recently was we took advantage of the work that y'all did down at the Capitol in giving us some of these statutes that allow school boards some flexibility and allows them to be able to allow certain people to carry firearms in schools. The Fannin County Board of Education just recently adopted a policy that does just that. It allows school staff to be able to be armed. It's got details in there about training and vetting and things like that. But, you know, the response from the people in Fannin County to that has been overwhelmingly positive. I was really surprised, and people have been very vocal about it. They've been very appreciative that our school board had the guts to jump right in and be the first county in the state to adopt that policy. We have a super sharp school superintendent who sat down and drafted a policy that I think absolutely covers everything, and I think it'll do the job. It gives us the option to be able to do that. It does not require that it be done. It gives us control of it to be able to vet the people, to say how many, and to iron out all the details. Anything that might come up, we have control of being able to send that program wherever we want it. And it's done in a partnership with the sheriff's office, so there's two good sets of eyes on everything that's done. So we're looking forward to getting that kicked off. They just finalized that policy last week, so we're going to kind of ease into it slowly and make sure that we don't do anything rational. And but again, you know, the biggest misconception that I have seen about it in the people that have been vocal, kind of, I'm going to say semi against it. Nobody has just come right out and said you're crazy, but there's been some people.
Not that they told you about it.
Yeah, right. Not to our face, anyway. But people are, I what?
You are armed.
Most of the comments that I've heard, the public comments, have been along the lines of you're giving teachers guns and they need to be teaching. Well, they don't know what we're doing because we hadn't done nothing yet. But we've not said anything about making teachers carry guns. We've not said anything about making anybody that don't want to carry a gun in the school. It's just totally voluntary. And even if a teacher did, the way we have this program in our heads that we want it to play out is that if you have student responsibilities, in other words, if you're a teacher and you have a classroom, that's what we want your focus on. We want you concentrating on teaching, not concentrating on having to disarm a threat. So that's kind of a misconception that everybody, when they want to buck this thing, that seems to be what comes up every time. Well, that's really not the way it's designed. That's not what we're planning on doing. So I think hopefully in time that'll get ironed out. But we are in the infancy of moving this program forward, and we're going to see how it goes. You know, y'all spoke a lot earlier there, the fellow that did the presentation there, that there are a whole lot of different aspects to school security. There's, you know, a lot of it is prevention, and thank goodness that y'all are willing to take the steps to get into the schools and provide the mental health analyzing and training and seeing if there's anything that needs to be done there. That's very helpful to us. And, you know, that's kind of where we're at in Fannin County. We've been practicing, of course, active shooter training for years, ever since I've been sheriff. In the summertime, the school system allows us to use the schools, the actual buildings, to do our active shooter training. One thing that we did that was, I thought, a very positive thing was a few years ago, we found out about a program that Gwinnett County was actually running down there. It was called Beyond the Active Shooter, which incorporates your EMS and your first responders into your initial response teams. In other words, they're not just sitting around waiting for everything to cool off inside the building. Just as quick as they start arriving on the scene, we plant them inside our entry teams, or our entry people that are going in, and we'll put a guard in front, and we'll put a guard in the rear, and we'll send EMTs in just as quick as they start establishing that there have been casualties. It don't matter if it's law enforcement or students, whoever they are. We start taking those people inside the building immediately, sometime, even possibly before the threat has been eliminated, to start dealing with those casualties. So that's something that I would encourage other law enforcement agencies to look at. I know the alert training that's provided by the state has kind of taken off, and a lot of people have adopted that, which is great. But the positive thing that I see about this Gwinnett County model is that it does start dealing with the casualties a whole lot quicker. So that made sense to me for us to start operating that way. So that's kind of where we're at in Fannin County now. And again, I really appreciate y'all taking the time to look at this, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Donnie Craig with Sheriff in Pickens County, neighboring county here from Dawson. I want to echo what these guys have said. I appreciate everybody taking the time to come over and discuss this issue. Obviously, it's one of the probably the most hot topics that we deal with in law enforcement. You know, back in the day, we like to think that this is not something that we're going to have to deal with. I think those days are over for us. You know, we like to think it's not going to happen. I think now it's not, you know, it's not a matter of when, but it's going to happen. You know, if we're not careful, it's going to happen. So as Dane said, we got to plan for the worst. Unlike a lot of the guys that I've heard from, these neighboring sheriffs and throughout the state, I'm probably one of the most fortunate sheriffs that I know of when it comes to working with our school system and our communities. I came over today with Dr. Wilson, which is our school superintendent. I probably have probably one of the best relationships when it comes to working with our community and our system. They provide a 70% of the funding for our SROs, and have been since I took office. When I originally took office, we were set up where the school had their own campus police, like they do down in Cherokee County to the south. That at the time wasn't working out very well. We came in the year after I took office, and we took over the campus police, and now we provide the SROs through the sheriff's office. At this time, we have just approved 2 new SROs, which will give us 6 SROs for 7 schools. Next year, I think with the reorganization of the schools, we will be having 6 schools and 6 SROs. So we'll have 1 for every school. Unfortunately, as Dane pointed out, that's still not enough. In order for us to have, you know, full coverage for our schools, we've got to have at least 8 or maybe 9 deputies to cover those 6 schools. And I know it was mentioned funding. As you guys know, funding is always a huge issue, you know, for us. You know, so that's always at the top. But, you know, training is huge, you know, to help us. You talked, the gentleman that made the presentation talked about a lot of different issues that our system has already taken a huge initiative as far as cameras. You know, our system is putting cameras in the classrooms. That was a real hot topic, you know, when you start talking to the teachers about putting cameras in the classrooms. You know, they didn't like it. You know, I remember when we started putting cameras in the patrol cars, they didn't like it, you know. But guys, when we started putting cameras in the patrol cars, it taught our deputies to be more conscious about how we acted and how we, you know, handled ourselves out on the street and making our traffic stops. I'm a firm believer that I think that'll make a difference in the classrooms. I know that the system that's being discussed in the classrooms now will allow our deputies to be able to do a live stream back to our patrol cars. As we put the laptops in our cars, we will be able to see firsthand when there's an active shooter or a situation that we need to be made aware of. If there's something going on, we will know immediately if there's a bad situation in that classroom. so we can immediately respond without having to go through third-hand information through the school, through the 911 center. We will know how to respond and can pull up live and see what's going on immediately. So I think that's going to be huge for us in Pickens County and help us respond appropriately when the time comes up. You know, securing those doors, and the gentleman talked about propping those doors with rocks. That's got to stop. You know, 10 years ago, we done a school assessment. Without their knowledge, we come in and we done a walk around and we done that security check on all of our schools, and it was miserable. I'll just tell you. And that was the time before we started having all these school shootings. 2 months ago, we went in when we were doing, the school was doing their lockdown drills. And over the last several years, I can tell you how proud I was to watch those teachers and those students and how quick they went into lockdowns, and how those teachers are now allowed to think outside the box and think for themselves without having some administrator tell them, no, you can't bring ratchet straps in to secure those doors. No, you can't, you know, do certain things. So having those teachers to be able to think for themselves, having those teachers and administrators work together to secure their own classrooms. You know, I walked through the halls at, 1 o'clock in the evening, and you could not even tell there was a single person in that entire school. Was truly amazing. I could not get into a classroom even with a master key. There was no way that I was getting into a classroom. So to see those administrators and teachers take the initiative to really think outside the box and to help, secure those schools, I think they're headed in the right direction. But to have the technology that they need as far as the cameras to be able to secure their doors with the locking mechanisms where they can swipe the cards in and out. And I know that, a lot of these schools now, when they build them, they can't build them large enough to cover the classrooms, and we're having to put, mobile homes outside. So they're having to get back and forth, through classes. They're having to go outside to the field house and, to the ag barn at the high school. And, it's tough. But there are ways to secure those schools in between the classes. And that's one thing we're dealing with at our high school. They're talking about putting a guard shack. We talked about putting a guard shack at our high school. Well, the parents went crazy. We don't need a guard shack. So we backed up and we said, okay, we're not going to put a guard shack. We're going to put a welcome center. Oh, okay, it's a welcome center. So now the community's behind it. So now we're putting a welcome center at the high school so we can welcome the students and the parents as they come in to visit. And so now the community's, they're in support of it. So we just have to educate our communities and educate our parents and our students to let them know that we are here to support them. And it goes back to what you said earlier about the environment. You're 100% correct on we have to focus on the environment. And we can train all day long on how to respond to these active shooters. But guys, if we're not working on that environment, it's not going to matter, because I believe that if we don't focus on that environment and to see something, say something, if those students don't know that they can't come to our SROs or those campus police officers that are in the school, and we're not building that good environment, that they don't know that they can't come to our teachers and say, hey, I heard that little Johnny down here may be thinking about doing something. If we don't build that environment that's friendly and that they know that they can't come to us, what we need to really focus on is how do we prevent that active shooter. We can, like I said, we can train all day long on how to respond, but what we really need to focus on is how do we prevent this from happening. How do we make it easy to get the information from the teachers and the students that what's really going on in the school to our SROs and to the sheriff and to the campus police. You know, there's a lot of technology available out there. How do we get the information to the right people so we can be investigating and finding out what's going on before the school happens? You know, after the last school shooting happened, you know, our office was investigating things around the clock. I mean, we were flooded with call after call after call about things that were going on, and luckily, we were getting those calls, you know, about kids who were threatening to bring guns to schools. And we were following up. You know, we would shut down our CID, our investigation division, and go into the school and investigating, you know, dozens of threats because these kids were afraid. You know, we were getting text messages and emails and Facebook messages because kids were afraid. So we've got to figure out a way to contact and let those kids know that it's okay to call us. It's okay to let us know when they see something, you know, so we can investigate those incidences. But if they don't contact us is when we need to be afraid. So.
Thanks, Sheriff Craig. Committee members, y'all have any questions for these? Correct, I think this was a little bit balanced there.
I do. This is for either one of you all. Is there a difference in the pay for the SROs and the ones that are doing the regular sheriff duties?
No, they're not. I want to touch on something else too, and it goes along with all this. And I think it's so wonderful to be sitting here having these conversations about school security. And that's what it boils down to, because it's okay when the school superintendent and everybody agrees and everybody's on the same page. But what happens when the sheriff comes up and says, I need, if you're going to put me in responsible for securing the school system, this is what I need, and you don't get a response, that's a problem also. And that's what's happened in Gordon County. They've put this burden on me and this responsibility, and I'm saying, okay, if you want, Gordon County, if you want the school safe, this is what you're going to need, and I hadn't got a response from the school board. Now, that's an issue. So that's a question that needs to be asked. Who's responsible? Who is responsible for securing our schools? That's a good question, isn't it? That burden's been placed on us, but when we ask for those additional resources, we don't get a response. So if you're going to put that burden on us, then at least give us a response, so we'll have something to tell our constituents and the people in the county. But yeah, the pay is the same.
Okay. And the second part of the question kind of goes along with that, with the challenge with recruitment in comparison when you all are just normally trying to staff the sheriff's office, and now with having to do the recruitment for the SROs.
Mm-hmm. You have to have an individual that wants to be a school resource officer. You can't just pick somebody and assign him to be a school resource officer.
It takes a very unique individual
It
to be
does.
able to put them in the school.
They've got to want to be there.
In the days of putting grandpa, who's been patrolling for 30 years in the school system, is not a good idea.
Yeah,
You got to have somebody with some tactical sense.
Absolutely. I have to take and handpick which deputy I can send to the school. And I can put a lot of guys in uniform patrol or in the jail or, you know, even sometimes over in CID, but I have to pick some of my best people and put them over in the school system that I am willing to let go down and work with our kids. You know, they are our most valuable resources in our school system, and we have to be very careful who we allow to go work with our kids.
You know, if someone was to fund us 2 or 3 more school resource officers right now, I would have a hard time finding them.
Just like your thoughts on this, and I think the answers may differ from between law enforcement and between maybe school boards or the education professionals. But in my experience, it's not too difficult to secure a facility. We know what needs to take place. We do that all the time. You secure your perimeter, you harden your access points, you check everyone that goes in and comes out, or goes in, and you have armed security inside and outside as well. But the dynamic that goes on in say a courtroom or even a prison that we might secure is different than the dynamic that goes on in the classroom or in a school system.
There has to be a blend.
Where is that balance? Is there a balance? In your opinion, what would be that balance?
You don't want to create a compound type environment at a school, nor at a church. I mean, we've been through the same thing with the churches. You have to give, you know, I'll give you a good example. You come to the Capitol. You walk in the Capitol, it feels just like it did in 1980. Everybody's welcome. You don't get this feeling that, you know, that the military's there and that there's armed guards and security everywhere. It's got the appropriate feel to it. That's the best example I can give you. You have to maintain that in your schools, and then, you know, when you start looking at churches, you have the same problem. You can't create a secure compound type environment for a church. People won't come.
But how do you achieve that?
Well, that's a good question. There has to be a happy medium somewhere.
How do you
here's
find
the bottom line at the end of the day, along the lines of what you just said. If someone decides that they're going to come to a school and they're going to shoot that school up and kill just as many people as they can, they're going to do it. And there's not nothing nobody can do to stop it. It's as simple as that.
I think if I could add to your question, you look at the different components involved in any law enforcement agency. If our courthouse is short-staffed, other tasks are going to get postponed or not completed that day to cover that front entrance. We're going to make sure that that metal detector and that screening station is covered. Same thing in the jail. Nobody's going to come in your jail unless they're checked first, unless they're, you know, searched thoroughly. If you're short-staffed that day, where you got to pull it from? Well, maybe somebody involved in the back, cell floor security, things of that nature. Same thing in our school system. And I think what you have up here, you have a panel of law enforcement officers that's trained from day one to be proactive. None of us want to be reactive. And in our case here, it comes down to staffing. We obviously always want to ask for more. We know that life circumstances come up. We know that things happen where we can't, you know, adequately staff what we want to. But when our schools are empty, when our schools are left unprotected, we've got to pull from somewhere if we have them. You know, here locally, and I'm not being critical, but our patrol staff, I don't have the reserve deputies on patrol that I can pull in to handle school safety, things of that nature. So I think, you know, from at least my perspective of it, we all want to be very proactive in what we're doing. We would all love to have two or three officers in every school system. You know, but ultimately everything comes with a price tag. We understand that. I applaud Fannin County for what they've done, and myself and Dr. Gibbs have had conversation as well. You know, at least from my perspective, no objections whatsoever to have certain folks in our school system armed. And we stand prepared and ready to help, you know, should the school board decide that's the direction that they want to go forward with this. I think there's ways that can be vetted. I think there's ways that can be managed, and I think there's ways that can be successful. And I don't mean to sound bad, but one well-placed diversion in Dawson County, we may have to pull our resource officers out to go take care of things, and thereby leaving our schools exposed. And other sheriffs up here want that. We want to make sure that we have adequate protection everywhere and use any available resource that we have to meet that need.
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Not totally, but I think it's going to, the types of security measures that you can put into place, there are many out there. The degree to which any given community wants to implement the various levels of security is something that's going to have to be made at the local level.
What are your thoughts on that? You're a lawman.
Say again now?
What are your thoughts on that?
But as I said, it's going to have to be a question at the local level as to how you approach that. Some communities are going to be receptive, I would think, to some perhaps more aggressive type of security measures. Others, just because of the nature of what goes on in the school itself and the purpose of the school, are going to be a little more resistant. So it's, each community is going to have to find its balance,
Right.
I believe, into its
Right.
approach. But
Well-
I was just curious to hear your thoughts in regard to how you thought might best work in your various
Representative
communities.
Lund, and
I
I
know in
understand what
Pickens-
you're saying, and it's not a one-size-fits-all
Right.
for every district and every county and city. The biggest question we have is whose responsibility is it?
Well, I know in Pickens, I've had some of my citizens ask about metal detectors and, that they wanted to start, checking the students when they come in. That's almost impossible for us, the way our school's laid out and the staffing that we have. There is no way that we could set up metal detectors and start searching all the students, obviously with the staffing that we have. Now, I think there are some states or some systems in the state that actually do that. In our county, there's just no way that we could do that with the current staffing. If I told Dr. Wilson that we needed, 10 more deputies next year to do that, I'm sure he would have he'd probably have a fit over that, but not that I could probably hire 10 more next year to, if we decided we wanted to do it, but it's just impossible.
This kind of piggybacks on what he said a little bit. In your opinion, is there any model that's better than the other in how to do this? And kind of the second part is, knowing that there's always going to be limited resources, is the only answer more manpower? Would that be what you would say right now, more boots on the ground? Or are there other technology areas, hardening the place, the school buildings and grounds? I think that's what Eddie was trying to get to. What is that balance? We know, having been on the education committee, listen, there's never going to be enough money for education. We could take the whole $26 billion state budget and put it in education, they'd still ask for more money, I guarantee you. There's no way to do it.
Yeah.
And probably rightly so, because there's nothing more valuable than the education. There's certainly nothing more valuable than security. But with those limited resources, if you could have those additional resources, would it be more people, or could it be something else?
Speaking for us in Fannin County, I think that personnel would certainly be the most valuable thing that we could add to what we're already doing. I really do. If we had the money, that's where we'd spend it, in other words.
And I understand that, as you said, if it's your responsibility, you feel better if you got boots on the ground right there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there any model around the country that you've seen people use that gives ratios of people to what you're doing?
The best model for me is when the school system takes responsibility for the security of their school system and they have their own police department. That's the best way. But
See,
there
that
again,
does
it
not
depends on
work for
funding.
me. That
No.
don't seem to be the best for me.
Nor does it for me.
I won't control that.
I like to have the SROs, and when I took office, we had campus police. It just did not work for either one of us. We took over, and our system works great. To answer your question, I think having SROs, and we've beefed that up a little bit, but I think doing what Dr. Wilson and our board has done is beefing up the technology, hardening the doors and putting the cameras in. I think that's huge. Having a mixture of those two, because those cameras and those doors, having those secured, and then having, a little bit more staff, and I think that has made a big difference.
Yeah. And that was the reason in 2010, the state legislature passed that law for the school system to have their own security. And as far as, with 12 schools, it's a big responsibility.
I started to say, but now you got to compare the two counties. I'm 232 square miles, 30,000 population. His county, you've got 60,000. and then I
12
compare the
schools.
county to the south, Cherokee County, there's no way, the county that size, for my size county, it works great. And then a lot of the issues, again, Fannin County has just implemented allowing their schools to carry weapons. Pickens and Fannin, that works great. I've had that conversation with Cherokee County Sheriff Frank Reynolds. He's terrified. There's no way that that would work in Cherokee County. Again, Pickens, we're having that conversation now, and I'm not opposed to that under, the certain conditions. We think that that would work fine in Pickens County. Again, you look at Cherokee County, it'd be very difficult the way the makeup of Cherokee County is. It would be very difficult for that to work. So, as you're looking at each county, it's totally different. So, you have to look at a case by case, depending on what county and where you're from. And
Thank you.
We don't envy y'all, guys. We're trying to help. I know it's a big task.
Well, you may not envy us, but we appreciate y'all. I hope you all know that, I attentively, and I think the committee and everyone in the room listens to you guys, because you're where the rubber meets the road, and we know it. And you asked us some good questions. I wrote those down in blue, Sheriff Ralston, right there.
I tell you, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I'd be glad to speak to any of y'all anytime that, something comes up, you're riding down the road and something pops into your head and you have a question. I might or might not be able to help, but I'll certainly be glad to talk to you. My telephone number is area code me.
and he'll actually answer if you call him.
I will.
Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it very much. As we move along, we're looking at local school officials. You've been asked to speak. Come on up. We got folks from a lot of different counties. If we'd love to, you just come on up. And I want you to think about your most important things you want us to tell us, because we're going to, we got time, but we're going to run out. Who else you got behind me coming in there? Okay. Pardon? Okay, just need to stretch for a minute. But to keep moving on, committee members, I have lunch for y'all, by the way, if you don't know that. But, when you have people come from lots of different places, we try to pack a lot of knowledge in real quickly. And got the school folks here. I think it'd be interesting to hear, now that you've heard the sheriffs, to talk about what y'all think. And I think Sheriff Ralston's question to me is, whose responsibility is school safety? I think it's a real important question I think we'll need to answer. But if you will just start, we'll let you go down through this end. If you take about 5 minutes or so, and then that way the committee can ask questions, and tell us what you'd like for us to hear.
All right, my name is James Jones. I'm the director of an alternative program that serves Fannin and Gilmer counties. And I'm also the safety coordinator for Gilmer schools. And I know whenever I first started on our safety committee, I would look at the table and only educators would be there. So that, to me, was not acceptable, because me feeling it was my responsibility as the safety coordinator to help with the safety of the schools, I needed more people there. So now our meetings, we have GMA, we have local law enforcement, EMA, we have probation, we actually have the custodial supervisor there, anybody that would play any type of part in our school safety. One of the things too that I've always asked them to do now is to come to our schools, to walk through. We give them maps of the facilities, we give them the shut-offs for the utilities. We give them all of that information so that whenever they get there, it's not the first time that they're there and it being an emergency. So we want them to come in during those times that they set aside. They can schedule any time they want to come by, to visit, to walk around, those kinds of things, so that they're familiar with the facilities. One of the things too that we talk about every time is prevention. We talk about treatment. We talk about any type of approaches that we can use to stop things before they happen and to treat things after they happen. We do talk about even things as simple as fire alarms and fire drills. I know I'd called Mr. Ralston's office at one point to see if he could talk to the state fire marshal about reducing some of our fire drills. We do 9 of those every year, and I think it's been quite a while since any student was harmed by fire. We do a couple of lockdown drills, a couple of severe weather drills. So it would be nice to maybe exchange some of those fire drills for more lockdown drills, for more severe weather drills, those kinds of things. I know whenever we were talking about just some of the probabilities and statistics of things, probably if you have an active shooter, it probably will be a student at the school that's already sitting in class. That would be nice if that student had been searched beforehand, but many times that's not a possibility. It's very difficult to do that in many of our situations. So it would be good for that student who probably has some of the warning signs that probably that student has had some type of maybe mental health issue, that they've had loss, that they've had negative peer interactions, those kinds of things. And if we had some mental health professionals that could step in and, you know, I hate to use the word profile, but some of those do have those signs that we could get to those a little quicker. But like I say, we invite everybody to the table that we can that would have any part in helping us deal with safety. Mr. Long?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Benny Long, Assistant Superintendent for Fannin County School System. And again, we have just passed the policy to allow some of our employees to be armed. This is going to be, as Sheriff Kirby said, in the baby steps. And that's not all, though. I mean, I think today and in our community, there's a lot of focus on that. Okay, and that is just one piece of our plan. The first thing that I would like to say is that I think it's very critical that you have a relationship with our Sheriff's Department. You know, whose responsibility is it? It's our communities. It's the school system. It's the Sheriff's Department. It's emergency management. It's our local police department. We all need to collaborate and work together to maintain that our students are safe. You know, going all the way down to GMA. GMA comes in and looks at our safety plan every year. It's not required that they reevaluate it every year. We go above. You know, I want their eyes on our plan. I want them looking at what we're doing every year. I think it goes back to the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. It takes our community to make sure that we're safe. We're very fortunate in our community. You know, I think that we have a great relationship with all of our local emergency management, and I'll include law enforcement with that. You know, as Sheriff Kirby said and gave out his phone number, it's nothing to grab the phone and call and say, hey, we got a problem, can you talk me through this? We're fortunate that we have 5 resource officers, 1 in each one of our schools. Of course, it would be nice to have more, but you know, we have 1 in each one of our schools. I think that relationship in our community is critical. As he said, you know, we pay for 2, he pays for 2, and our Blue Ridge City pays for 1. I think it's critical that you build that bond to give everybody a little bit of buy-in and a little bit of support. And that way, everyone is on the hook for school security or school safety because they are our most valued possession. One of my other roles is transportation director. And I tell everybody that interviews for me with a job is that we pull up in a school bus and the parents know nothing about you. Many times they're not even going to know your name, but because you're in the big yellow taxi cab and open that door, they're going to give you the most valued possession they got that day and entrust that we keep them safe. And that's kind of my belief on our whole system is they're entrusting us with what we have and their most valued possession, and we have to work together. Some of the other things that we have done in just the last little bit is we have installed a new door system, South Toe locks. It's got the key cards that you come up and scan, which is all automated and computer controlled. With one key function from a computer, you can lock every door in the school down and call a lockdown instantly to where they're overridden with only certain aspects. We're adding camera systems. Cameras is just a minute part because you have to have somebody to monitor those. But in the last 2 months, we've added 56 cameras to our high school. The thing that I want to stress about our camera system, which also goes back to our relationship with the Sheriff's Department and law enforcement, is that they have access to our cameras. When they pull up on when the SWAT truck pulls up on our campus, they can log into our camera system and be given their officers that are going in information about what's happening in the school. Okay, they have that remote access to be able to do, which I feel like is critically important. And this afternoon, we have a conference call with a provider are looking at discussing mental health options for our system. There is some concerns about being able to help our students and to identify our students. I think it's a well-rounded piece of a puzzle that you got to put all the pieces in to ensure that our students are safe, but it takes the cooperation among everybody.
Thank you. My name's Damon Gibbs. I'm Superintendent of Schools here in Dawson County, and I want to thank you all very, very much for the work that you're doing, looking at school safety and such a critical issue. And Mr. Chairman, I'll answer that question. Everyone is responsible for the safety and security of our children and our communities. And we have a lot of partners in that effort in Dawson County. School safety is not a new topic. It's a great topic, but it's not new. We've done a lot of work over the last 4 years in Dawson County. We've limited access points. We have check-in systems that determine whether or not child sex offenders are trying to enter our buildings. So we've done a lot of that work. But when you have a budget and you're in the service industry, and we serve children in this community, 88% of our budget pays for people. And when we get additional funding from the state, we're very appreciative. We are tickled to death that the QBE funding formula is fully funded for the first time in a long time. But I would argue that there's no better time ever than to talk about flexibility in funding. We have eSPLOST funding, $7 million a year, that we're very strictly regulated in how we spend those funds. We don't want to use all those funds for people, but a little flexibility in allowing the local community to vote on an eSPLOST referendum that could make that decision on how much flexibility school systems could have would help districts like Dawson County put additional officers in schools or put additional staff in place to prevent things from happening. But I will warn you, there is no one-size-fits-all, and there is no 100% security of a school system. We have hundreds and hundreds of students on buses twice a day, 180 days a year. There's not an elementary school, that I know of that does not send every child out to recess at some time during the day if the weather is like it is today. So we have vulnerabilities, we have weaknesses. But when we're in the service industry and we're dealing with people, the way we become safer is to use those resources wisely and look at our funding sources and how we're able to use the funds that we're allocated on a yearly basis. So any discussion about that would be greatly appreciated by Dawson County. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Todd Shirley. I am the Chief Operations Officer for the Forsyth County School System, and I am honored today to represent Dr. Jeff Bearden. He is an outstanding superintendent, and we have a wonderful board. We, like all of these other communities, feel like we are blessed. We do have an outstanding relationship with all of our local first responders, and for us, that is always a top priority in our district. One of the things that we have done in light of the last mass school shooting in Florida is put together a task force. That task force was under the direct supervision of our superintendent and our sheriff, Ron Freeman. It was made up of a number of school system representatives, fire, police, emergency management, building facilities, and our media relations people. We put boots on the ground in every school in our district, every facility in our district, and we have over 40 facilities in our district. That task force was charged with making recommendations to the school board, and we made recommendations to the school board last month. We feel as if we are a very progressive district when it comes to school safety. We have over 1,400 high-definition cameras surveilling our schools now. We have lockdown buttons in every facilities. We have school resource officers, over 30 school resource officers to protect our students. But one of the things that we decided was that we were going to step out on a limb and make a little bit different recommendation to our board. We realize that in all the work that we do in our department, and our department supervises school safety, student discipline, athletics, transportation, and next year we will take on food services too. But one of the things that we realize is that we have kids that are very dark in our county. They are turning to the internet to learn things that we really can't control anymore. We have probably more problems revolving around cell phone use right now than anything else that we deal with. And our kids are turning away from adults in our schools and turning away from their parents, and they're turning towards these dark things. Well, we wanted to be able to address that. We know that our ratio of counselors to students is an outstanding ratio when we look across the nation, but we recognize that we can do more. So our board last month approved us to hire 6 new staff members. Those staff members will be called student advocacy specialists. They will report directly to our office. They will be stationed at a high school, and they will work in a vertical cluster to follow kids from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade that will be identified by school counselors, administration, our social workers as the kids that are truly the most in need in our community. They will act almost as a mentor or a big brother, big sister. They're not there to do therapy. They're there to put hands on. They're there to be an advocate for those kids. And we are extremely proud that our board stepped out and said, let's do this. Let's see what we can do with this program. These people do not have to report to school principals. They will not be given any extracurricular duties. They will focus on our kids that are in the greatest need. So we feel as if we're being very progressive in our district. We are blessed with an outstanding board and an outstanding superintendent, and we are also blessed with a great community of first responders. We are in awe of everything that you guys are all doing to help, and we certainly offer any assistance we can provide. Any of you that want to come to our facilities and take a look at what we're doing, our doors are always open to you as they are always open to every parent that we have. Thank you.
My name is Carlton Wilson, and I'm superintendent in Pickens County. I want to thank you for this opportunity to be here. I'm going to go just a little bit different. We have a great relationship with our sheriff, and we're doing a lot of those things that all of my colleagues have spoken about. But there's some things that I need y'all to help with, and this next General Assembly would be wonderful. One, from funding formula, love to see school safety and security and even possibly RSOs become part of the QBE funding formula that we can then plan every year and not just wait for grants to come along, but it can actually be a funding formula for that. I'd like to change some of the verbiage for eSPLOS, that we can use some of the personnel issues with safety and security out of SPLOS. And I've got some people in my county that want to give tax donations for security to our system, and it would be great if they had an extra, some sort of special tax exemption or tax credit that they could get for those donations. Love to have our security expenditures not subject to open records request. I'd like to thank you for providing and the opportunity and passing the protection of our security plans from open records, but I need the creation of those plans and the meetings that we have for those plans to create those security plans to be subject, not to be subject to open records also. I'd love to have the availability of have conversation with administration, law enforcement agencies, companies, or consultants in the executive session, and have our plans and things created, developed, and voted on in executive session, that we can ask our sheriff to come in and talk to our board, or security agencies to come in and talk to our board about our security plans, and like to be able to do that in executive session. I would love to see creation of a special designation for those of our systems that allow some of our people to carry armed. Maybe a designation of like something similar like a school marshal, and have it actually under post-certification with limited authority and liability protections above what we already have. I'd like for all expenditures related to training to be acceptable expenditures out of our staff development and grants. I'd also like to allow our school system to use general, state, and federal funds to provide equipment, possibly things that we could buy for our RSOs and our school, and actually purchase it from some of our school funds to give to our RSOs or our sheriffs. Right now, we can't make that transfer easily. And that's a good start. So if I can have all that with the funding, we'll... And one thing I did want to mention about the question a while ago about security for the system. If a student decides they want to be an active shooter, and they got to get the guns on campus, on Friday night football or Tuesday night basketball games, when we have several hundred people coming in, we couldn't do metal detectors. I mean, it's hard enough to just do it for our student population, but to have all the visitors that come on our campus all day long, it'd be very simple for a student to come in and hide a gun to be used the next day when we do have security measures in place. So as schools are open, like they are, is very, very difficult. And I used to make a statement that I could make it as secure, the most secure school in the entire nation, and we wouldn't have any problems. I could make it just like a federal prison, and then I discovered all the contraband that gets in federal prisons. So I'm not sure I can even make it as safe as that. But there has to be a balance for openness and for parents to want to come into the schools, and also to keep our students safe. The answer to all of that comes down to relationships. Relationships that we build between students to students, teachers to students, parents to teachers, community members to our schools, and our SROs and our law enforcement to our students. That's where we're going to prevent it, and that's the recognition of those students that need extra help. But most students, when they lose all hope, is when they usually go to that dark side. But the technology, the funding definitely helps, and we need your help. And I do appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. Committee members,
Not so much a question, but just a comment. And thank you for those recommendations. That's exactly what we're looking for, those types of things, feedbacks that we can come back and sort of bounce those types of things around. Being from a larger community, I guess, or school system where we have over, about 60-some schools there, and a lot of resource officers, well, not a lot, but a lot of schools too, actually, secure, for lack of better words. With technology, cameras, just devices like that, how are we, and I know I think the speaker talked about 16 million down, and I don't know how that's going to be divvied out, I guess, by school system to work on those types of things, or to purchase those types of devices. How do you guys see that as I would say, the way ahead, or part of the way ahead in assisting and mitigating some of these risks that we have?
Well, I know, of course, I wish I'd had it a little bit earlier, because I just spent about $300,000 for cameras in all of our schools. But and that's exterior cameras and hall cameras and things like that, but we just committed $1.5 million to put cameras in every classroom in our school with the emergency response buttons on those cameras. And so it's, those are two different areas that we do tie it all together to be able to have our sheriff's office to be able to log straight into those cameras, whether they're in the classroom or in the hall, and be able to see what kind of emergency is going on. And so, you know, I think it's extremely important for various reasons, from bullying to accusing students of doing things or accusing teachers of doing things, plus also the educational aspect of it. I think it's huge, but the safety is really the biggie that's there. And you know, I was very fortunate we were able to do it under our SPLOST dollars, but I know my colleagues here would greatly appreciate having that technology more available in their classrooms.
You had mentioned about tax incentives for individuals who want to make donations. And I remember, I think it was Chairman Coleman, we had a bill that we had passed about people being able to make donations to the school system, to make donations and the money could be allocated to the school system. I'm not sure if it was anything in there related to school safety, but there might be something, an avenue that's already there that we've already passed legislation about that might be beneficial to your suggestion on that part.
Thank you. Of course, you know, a little extra tax relief would help with some of those donations also. You just up the percentages.
Well, just so you'll know, this guy's my school superintendent. Gave you a list, didn't you, Carlton? Well, I asked you to, so that's mine. But thank you, guys. I mean, I think from a committee, your passion for education, looking after our kids is so evident. And it's such a broad group, from smaller systems to the biggest in the state, for sure. But I appreciate it. Let's give them all a hand. Thank you.
Thank you.
I apologize, but before you leave, because then we have two superintendents up here, getting back to what some of the things that one of the sheriffs sort of hit on. I know it's everybody's responsibility and all that, but whom do you think that because it always has to fall on someone or some head. Where do we think that this school security falls upon them? Is it the local sheriff's, law enforcement, or is it in the superintendents up under their umbrella? And again, I understand the answer that it's everybody's responsibility, but it got to be somebody has to be in charge.
Well, I believe when, as superintendent of schools, anything that happens in the school system ultimately is my responsibility. I think that we work very, very closely with our sheriff's department because they are charged with public safety. But we put procedures in place, we put safety plans in place in cooperation with our emergency management personnel, but ultimately the safety and security of the children would rest on my shoulders in Dawson County.
I agree with that to a point. It is my responsibility. Anything that happens in those schools is my responsibility, and I take full responsibility. But criminal activity, the welfare of our community also lies with the sheriff. And I'm just very thankful that I know when we had a campus police, we did not have the available resources. We were limited because it was a very small department at that time. But to be able to have our sheriff and the relationship, and that's the big thing, is our relationship with the sheriff and his staff. When we had, right after the Florida shooting, we had a number of middle school students that, and I know it's probably going to be recorded, but just plain stupid. making statements about shooting somebody. Well, I had the entire Criminal Investigations Division for 40 hours investigating all those claims that I would not have been able to do if it was just in-house. So there's a lot of things that my sheriff does for our school system that the school system could not provide for. And so I'm glad with our relationship the way it is right now.
If you don't mind, I may interject there. I believe it is the school system's responsibility. But then, of course, like I was saying earlier, we need to share that responsibility with other people, our local law enforcement, our local EMA, GMA. We want everybody involved so that whenever we ask for their help, we make it conducive for them being able to help us. So that's why I want them to have the accessibility, our safety plans, those particular type folks. So it is a shared responsibility, but we're the ones that are ultimately responsible, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now that we have talked to our school officials and we talked to our law enforcement, I thought, and Chairman Jaspers agreed, that it would be important to highlight a case where there was successful intervention, where there was a report to law enforcement. They did partner with the school system, law enforcement, and our prosecutors in Cherokee County. So it was a case that came out of Etowah High School. And so here to share that successful intervention is Chief Assistant District Attorney Rochelle Carnesale. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you so much for the invitation. This time last year, there were students at Etowah High School that were busy planning in detail with specific arrangements about executing a mass homicide at Etowah High School. That came to our attention not just by luck, but because another child made a report of a family member who was scaring them. So in our case, a young woman came to be kind of concerned about a cousin of hers. First, because she became aware that he was mixing chemicals, and that caused her to look into his journal. What she read there scared her. She took photographs, and despite being encouraged by a family member, one of her parents, not to make a report, the young lady made a report. We're all in this business together, and I think everyone's worst fear is the phone call that we receive in law enforcement and prosecution, at Dfacs in the schools and everywhere of, it's happened. I think that because of the environment in our country right now, the general consensus in law enforcement, and I heard some of that today, was not if but when. And we were so blessed in Cherokee County that that one child was courageous enough to step forward. There were specific, detailed written plans about how to execute this killing. It wasn't just going to involve weapons, although one of the two children had ready access to an AR, which was kept loose in the house, along with hundreds of rounds of ammunition. They planned to use chemical weapons as well, and they had already developed a small amount of that. That actually made it into the school at one point, and then was taken to the other child's house. So substantial steps were taken in our case towards executing this mass homicide. They had intention of using bombs. They had detailed plans about choke points in the school. This is just literally law enforcement's worst nightmare. They had the map of the school. They had decided where they could best begin to use their chemical weapons. And I'm not going to go into tons of detail today because this case is pending. But what I'm telling you about is information that's already come out in court. And that's the reason I'm not being more specific for you today. But these kids had figured out where best to chase kids to a choke point to have maximum damage inflicted. They had specific ideas about where to put smoke bombs to scare kids into that area, where they could stand with chemical weapons to best injure children. They had a specific kill list of their fellow students. Possibly most chilling is that the kill list included every African American student at their school and a list of special education students. So pretty terrifying information. So that little girl, I believe, making that report, saved a lot of lives that would have been lost 24 days ago. And that's pretty chilling. In Cherokee, we have a very good working relationship between all of the agencies, law enforcement, the district attorney's office, the schools, Dfacs, and we have a multidisciplinary response to a number of different cases. We have a crash response team. We have a homicide response team, and we handled this instance and this threat in the same way that we handle those matters. So the report came to our office in the morning. We heard from the sheriff's office early in the morning that the night before this information had come in, and they had already interviewed what we believe to be the only suspect and taken him into custody. Threat averted. We all gathered at the sheriff's office and began to pour through the information, and quickly everyone participating realized there was more than one set of handwriting, which then again terrified everyone, because who's in school today that's part of this plan? The sheriff's office did an excellent job doing interviews that morning. Immediately the second perpetrator was discovered. It was confusing because both perpetrators were also on the kill list, because this was going to be a murder-suicide. I don't know how to tell communities how to avoid this, but I agree with everything I heard today, and I think it really does boil down to relationships, as been repeated over and over, to the environment in schools, and this idea that it's okay to tell someone that you're afraid, and it's important. To the extent that you're going to have initiatives in your schools to improve environment, I would highly encourage empathy initiatives. It seems like there's a common theme amongst these cases around the country. A lot of kids who feel disenfranchised, not necessarily obvious targets of bullying in schools, but they feel disenfranchised. They're sad, they're troubled, they're lonely kids. Some peer counseling possibly, but just a better sense of what's going on in our schools. And the only thing I haven't heard today, I've heard everybody's responsible for this, law enforcement, all these different agencies, but parents are very responsible. If you think about what happened in our case, if mom had successfully talked that girl out of making the report, who knows what would have happened? So I think some of that is the conversation you're having with parents at the local level as well, in terms of these threats are real. This is happening everywhere, and you need to take it seriously, and you can trust us to handle it appropriately. So our part in law enforcement and prosecution is to, in fact, handle it appropriately and take the right steps and make sure kids are protected. We get a lot of support from Representative Ballinger. She's an alumni of the District Attorney's Office as well. And I just can't say enough about how important it is to partner with your other agencies. It made a difference in preparing our case, in determining how best to investigate, who to talk to, who other subjects might be, in making our case. I don't know when it will go to trial. There are complicated mental health issues in our case. But I do know that from our experience that if kids don't feel empowered to tell an adult that they're afraid, and if parents think that it's something to be covered up and dealt with within the family, we're going to have more and more of these problems in our schools.
Can you speak just a little bit on how the school system, police department interface with the sheriff's office, and how Sheriff Reynolds' office handled that in conjunction with the school police department?
We're really lucky because we do have a new sheriff, Frank Reynolds, who agrees with our outgoing sheriff that these important matters are best worked together. We just believe we can work up the best cases if the DA's office and law enforcement's working together. We do have school police, as Representative Ballinger said before. As soon as school police got that report, they contacted the sheriff's office. They don't have the resources to deal with an investigation of this nature. And frankly, now that this has occurred on a weekly basis, we have cases coming into juvenile court that are much more minor than this, but where there have been threats. Our juvenile court prosecutor estimated that we have one case a week of a juvenile complaint that's made a threat against a teacher or the school. They haven't taken substantial steps, but school police is very busy now with things of this nature. So they contacted Sheriff Reynolds' office. CID immediately called our office as well, and we went to headquarters at the Sheriff's Department. We involved the juvenile court, we involved local child services, and does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering at what point did school police hand it over?
Immediately.
So it was basically an investigation.
It was. As soon as they realized the significance of what they thought they had in front of them, they contacted law enforcement. Law enforcement went out that night and located the young man, and his female accomplice was located the next day. They might have civil liability. In our situation, I don't think the male perpetrator's parents were aware of what he was doing. I don't think the female's guardian was aware of what she was doing. In terms of the child whose mom tried to talk her out of making the report, I don't think she has any criminal liability. If something had happened, she might have had civil liability. Her idea was that her daughter should talk to the perpetrator instead of contacting authorities and ask him what was going on and try to do peer counseling with him. She just didn't take the threat seriously. Thank you.
Well, we've got a lot to work on, I do believe. But so I'll let you know, if you want to be notified of a meeting that's coming up, this lady right here, Sarah, let her know. She'll put your name on a list and she'll make sure that you're getting notification. Because they are going to move pretty fast. You know, we're going to be meeting in July. We're trying to find a date that's cooperative with everybody. But essentially, I hope, just like we talked about parents talking to kids and schools talking to kids and everybody talking, I hope that you talk to us. You've got a great committee that's sitting right here that some of y'all know from different bills and different things in the legislature, and I hope you take time to meet with them. We kind of divided, the next meeting is going to be a little bit more about prevention and like mental health and counseling and stuff like that we kind of touched on today. And if you know of a speaker of interest, I hope you'll let us know. Members, I appreciate your time. I mean, it's a busy time of the year. There's elections going on. I know Tommy's got one and others, and I appreciate taking your time to be here and be a part of this. And I appreciate your time. I'd have some lunches for you guys. Didn't want you driving off, hitting the Atlanta traffic. That's why we tried to leave early. But we'll stay around. If you have a question for us, we'd love to. If media wants to talk to any of folks, to be available afterwards. But that's the end of our meeting, and I appreciate y'all being here.